homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today in the kitchen, this is just kind of a fun experiment. Have you guys ever used pomegranate molasses or even heard of pomegranate molasses? It was one of those things that was just way off my radar for a long time. And then probably because of Ottolenghi, who has become very, very popular. He writes a food column for the New York Times. He writes food columns for the UK. I think he's based out of the UK, but his heritage is from the Middle East. And so he's written 4 or 5 different cookbooks that are all kind of Middle Eastern based recipes. He tends to be pretty heavy vegetable, not vegetarian necessarily, but a lot of vegetable heavy dishes. And pomegranate molasses is a very common ingredient in that part of the world. And as he gained popularity, it became a lot more popular as an ingredient. For years, I couldn't find it in my local grocery store. I'm not sure I could even still find it in my local grocery store. This is a bottle that I bought up in Spokane, Washington, which is about 4 hours away from us, at the Cost Plus World Market, which is one of my favorite places to just go poke around for fun ingredients, because I kept seeing it in recipes and wasn't able to find it locally. And it is simply pomegranate juice with some citric acid added and some sugar added. And it's cooked down until it's a syrupy form. And so no actual molasses. Molasses is actually part of sugar that's left over when the white sugar has been extracted. But it has a similar kind of sweet and tart and maybe just a hair of a bitter note in there. It's sticky. It's really just lovely and delicious. Ottolenghi recommends it in particular for lamb dishes, but it's really just a nice drizzle on anything that you want. A little bit of that kind of sweet and sour. And in the middle of probably October, I was going to my local grocery store, and there was a guy in the parking lot of the grocery store who was selling bags of pomegranates. And I'm sure he had come up from California or Arizona or someplace where they are able to grow easily. And he was selling them for $20 for a pretty big bag of pomegranates. There were probably 7 or 8 in there. And I love pomegranates. I've tried to grow them here. We're zone 7A, and theoretically we should be able to grow them here, but I've never been able to pull it off. I think I've planted them twice. And we get a cold snap and it dies completely back to the ground. And then for whatever reason, the gophers seem to really, really enjoy the pomegranate tree as well. And so the roots were getting eaten. And so I've kind of given up on trying to grow pomegranate. But I love pomegranates. It's one of my favorite seasonal fruits in September, October. And so I bought this big bag and I was playing around with chopped carrot salad that I'll put a link to that video below. It's really, really good. It's one of my favorite fall treats, and that has pomegranate seeds in it. Then I think I did the shaved Brussels sprout salad. That also had pomegranate in it. Link to that below as well. And so I was playing with all things pomegranate, but I had 2 or 3 left over that were starting to get quite dry on the outside, and I needed to do something with them. And I thought I probably should try making some pomegranate syrup. That would be fun to play with. You know, if you've ever had grenadine in a Shirley Temple, I used to drink Shirley Temples when I was a kid, and a Shirley Temple is just Coke with some pomegranate syrup in it. And so I thought, I should make some pomegranate syrup. And then it dawned on me, what I should make is pomegranate molasses. And so I just Googled a recipe for this, and it was just pomegranate juice, sugar, and some lemon juice. The ingredient on this bottle is pomegranate juice, sugar, and citric acid, and lemon juice is basically citric acid, so that's where that's coming from. And then I saw a really cool thing on how to get juice out of pomegranates quickly, which is you put them in a heavy-duty Ziploc bag and just crush them with a rolling pin. And so that was a brilliant tip. And then it turned out I only had 2 or 3 pomegranates left, and that isn't a ton of juice. I also, in my freezer, because I made jam commercially to sell at farmers markets for many years, I've still got some frozen fruit left over. I've stopped making jam, but I had a 2-gallon bag of pitted sweet cherries, and I thought, I'm just going to dry those. My husband loves them in oatmeal, and so I'm just going to thaw this out, throw them in the dehydrator, dry them for use in oatmeal, and get them out of my freezer. And it turned out, because they'd been frozen for, at that point, a couple of years, there was a ton of juice in there, because basically when you freeze fruit, imagine water balloons with sugar in them. Those ice crystals poke holes in all those water balloons. And so once you thaw out something that's been frozen, a whole lot of moisture comes out of it. And so I had probably at least a couple of cups of cherry juice just from thawing those cherries before I put them in the dehydrator. And since I didn't have a lot of pomegranate juice, I thought I'm just gonna make a cherry pomegranate syrup instead. And so this is mostly cherry, but with some pomegranate juice. I will put the recipe for actual pomegranate syrup or pomegranate molasses in the description below, which is what I was loosely following, but I was using a mix of cherry and pomegranate. What I came up with is quite delicious, and it's very syrupy. You can see that in the video. And what I did is I poured the hot syrup into this jar. So it was still boiling, and it got poured into this jar, put the lid on, and then immediately turned it upside down. This is called a hot fill and hold method. So I did not water bath can this. The cherry syrup is quite acidic. And when you do a hot fill and hold, if your contents are over 180 degrees and you pour it in here and put the lid on and turn it upside down for 3 minutes, that 180 degree temperature will essentially kill any mold spores that might be on the lid, and you don't actually have to water bath can this. I could have water bath canned it. It wouldn't have been a big deal. It was just a single jar, and I was like, I just don't feel like doing it. That's called hot fill and hold. The National Center for Home Food Preservation and extension offices really frown on that. They freak out and they tell you that absolutely that is not safe for a home canner to do. However, it is used commercially in all kinds of products, including jams. And so I think the reason that they don't encourage it with home canners is because home canners don't usually have things like thermometers, and they don't take into consideration their elevation. And so they just assume that home canners are not capable of making sure that things are hot enough when they do it. I was willing to take the chance on this. It's very acidic, so I'm not gonna get botulism spores or things like that reproducing in here because it's quite acidic, and I just didn't wanna take the time to actually can it. The one thing about hot fill and hold that you need to be aware of, and I have run into this, is if you're doing multiple jars, one, your jar should be warm when you start. As soon as you put something hot in a cold jar, that cold jar is gonna bring that temperature down pretty quickly, and so you're gonna drop below 180 pretty fast. And then the other thing is, as you get to the bottom, if you're doing multiple jars, as you get to the bottom of your pot, the contents have cooled off considerably in that 2 or 3 minutes that it takes you to fill up those jars. And so you want to be aware of that and keep your heat on, or just don't take the chance and just water bath can stuff if you're doing multiple jars. I've had product mold where it was the last jar that I put in the jar that I did hot fill and hold on, because the contents in the pan, because a lot of surface area and not a lot of mass anymore, just cooled off too fast. And so it was not hot enough by the time I got to the last jar. So not suggesting you do hot fill and hold, but there is a safe way to do it, and it is very common in commercial canning in certain applications, not all applications. And so usually things that are very sweet and very naturally acidic. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. It's kind of fun, but sorry, long rambling introduction to this video, but some interesting food science there. Pomegranate molasses, or in my case, cherry pomegranate molasses. Let's get started. So as I mentioned, I started out with about 4 cups, give or take, of cherry juice. This is the commercial pomegranate molasses, just to show you what the ingredients typically are. Very simple. I'm sure you could make this recipe just out of bottled pomegranate juice that you can get at the store. Here's my pomegranate seeds. And I'm just using a heavy-duty freezer bag here and smushing all of these little areoles to pop them open so that I don't have to do it in a different way. This is a very effective technique. Air in the bag makes it hard, and so you'll see me release the air out of this bag a couple of different times in an effort to try to not have that air bubble acting as a pillow and not being able to squish what I needed to squish. But other than that, this worked brilliantly. And they say that you can get anywhere from a half a cup to a cup of juice out of a pomegranate, depending on the size. And these didn't seem to be super crazy juicy, but they had been sitting for a couple of months. And then in an effort to get the very last of any flavor out of these pomegranate seeds, I went ahead and put a strainer over my pot, and I just kind of cooked them down in the cherry juice and now the pomegranate juice for a few minutes, just to get the very last of whatever was in there out. And I think I'd been cooking this cherry juice down for a little while before I even started to add the pomegranate juice to this. At this point, I'm going to filter everything into a smaller saucier pan because I've cooked this down probably by about half at this point. And a little fine mesh strainer is always nice for getting out any little bits of things that might be in there that you don't want. And so now we're down to, I don't know, this is probably a couple of cups at this point. I'm adding a half a cup of sugar and then basically the juice from a lemon, so around a quarter cup. I didn't measure this, but I was fine if it was a little bit more than that. And then here we've cooked it down almost to finished stage, and I've done enough different syrups and candies over the years that when you start to see these really fine bubbles, that's an indication that you're pretty much there. When there's a lot of water still boiling off, the bubbles are quite big, and when the bubbles start to get small, it's an indication that your temperature is actually going above 212 because you've cooked off all of the water and you're now basically making candy. So there's an example of what it looked like. I decided it was done, and then this is just getting poured into a pint jar, and just in case the heat shock makes that pint jar break, I do have this sitting in another container. It's rare, but it does happen, and so I'm just making sure that if that breaks, I don't have pomegranate juice all over my kitchen. Here, that pot has cooled off, and you can see how thick our syrup is. And I did taste this, and it doesn't taste exactly like the commercial product, of course, because it's more cherry than it is pomegranate, but really delicious. I think it's going to definitely be a great product to drizzle onto various meats and probably also over pancakes. So if you like food recipe adventures and you happen to have a big bottle of pomegranate juice in your fridge or access to fresh pomegranates, give this recipe a try, Tribe. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.